and good morning to everyone. Today we are here discussing at CEPS human rights violations at the Polish and Lithuanian external borders with Belarus. And my name is Lina Vasiliute, research fellow at CEPS, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We will be looking forward for your questions, and do not hesitate to post them in questions chat. And today's meeting is falling within the frame of ASILE project on the global asylum governance and the EU's role in this area. And we decided, after hearing about the 5 deaths at Polish-Lithuanian border, we came together with the Tineke Strik office to organize this meeting and to really see what's happening at the Lithuanian and Polish borders with Belarus and what EU should do about it. So MEP Tineke Strik will introduce just shortly the meeting of today, the focus of discussion, and we'll hear soon afterwards from, first of all, people on the ground. Eskedar Maštevicienė, who is activist in Lithuania and global mover in Lithuania. Afterwards, we'll hear from Tomas Zhenov, president of the Rule of Law and associate professor of law at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. And afterwards, we'll hear from EU institutions. So we are delighted to have with us Katarzyna Wenzel from Human Rights Monitor, Human Rights Fundamental Rights Office at Frontex, and also Tom Snells, Deputy Head of Cabinet of Commissioner Johansson of European Commission. And we'll hear also from the Council of Europe, Commissioner of Human Rights Officers Advisor Christian Mommers, to also a bit enlighten on how the Council of Europe sees the human rights situation at the borders. So Tineke Strik, the floor is yours, and please provide us with your insights.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction, and welcome to all of you. I'm very happy with this rich panel and also the timing of this debate, because the situation has become more and more alarming, and I think it's really good that we have a discussion this morning from so many different perspectives. And also thanks for CEPS to reach out to me and to have this joint cooperation, this joint project. Yes, just to introduce the topic, 1 year after the fraudulent presidential elections, the political and human rights situation in Belarus has even further deteriorated. And after the introduction of targeted sanctions from the EU and also support to the democratic opposition by Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, Lukashenko has turned to a new tactic in order to silence and punish those countries. He organized flights, as we know, from Iraq and other countries, abolished visa requirements from a number of countries of transit and origin, and redirected the migrants to the borders. So since this summer, thousands of migrants have arrived at the Eastern European EU borders, and the situation has become very grim. Migrants are stuck at the border, refused entry by Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, but also refrained from water, food, shelter, medical aid, legal and humanitarian aid. Access to an asylum procedure is out of the question at the moment. The Belarusian border guards don't take them back. And in the meantime, 5 migrants have died, as Lina already referred to. And this horrific situation is created at our own EU borders. And the EU institutions are framing the move of Lukashenko as a huge security attack to the EU and condemned the instrumentalization of migrants by Lukashenko, and rightly so, of course. But the answer, I think, can never be that we play exactly the same game. And I think this is what the panel and the discussion is about. because this is what is happening. Migrants are used as a tool also by EU countries to show that the EU will not give in to Lukashenko. And in the political debate, I also noticed that in the European Parliament, we see that the situation is now more or less framed as a kind of war situation in which we really need to stay united and show unconditional solidarity with Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, whatever they do. Because if we show that we are divided, Lukashenko would have reached his aim. I think that with this reasoning, the level of being hijacked by Lukashenko is even higher, because now we even let down our own core European values and rights, because they are under a huge threat. The rules on Schengen, on asylum, and the Charter of Fundamental Rights are gravely violated at the moment. The European Court of Human Rights has imposed interim measures because of the violation of the European Convention of Human Rights as well. And the application of the state of emergency at the border seems highly disproportionate if we look at the dramatic humanitarian consequences. But we will also hear more about that from Thomas Sinions. So not only Lukashenko's policies have to be addressed by the EU, but also the reaction of Poland and Latvia and Lithuania. There's no such thing as a no man's land or legal limbo. If they are at the borders, the EU obligations apply. And the European Court on Human Rights also assumes that they are on the Polish territory. It's up to the Commission to enforce the legal obligation, but until now, but I would like to hear more from Tom Snels also, I hear Commissioner Johansson mainly asking for more transparency at the border, knowing what is happening. And it's interesting in that regard that the European Court of Human Rights apparently has more certainty than the Commission on what's going on. And actually, I think it's not so difficult to follow what is happening, at least that people are refused entry and are stuck between the two authorities. I did not hear a firm condemnation of the instrumentalization of migrants by the EU countries, nor a clear demand that these practices should stop. But as I said, I hope to hear more from the Commission because maybe there is more into it. Frontex has been there as well. We saw it also from the press releases by the executive director of Legeri. And in that context, I must refer to the report that the European Parliament recently released just before summer on the inquiry to the allegations of Frontex role in pushback or other allegations of human rights violations. One of our conclusions was that the fundamental rights situation is not sufficiently taken into account while deciding on a joint operation. And if I look now at the press releases that Frontex gave, where it only praised the Polish authorities for their firm stance and for their practices, I'm afraid I question myself, what lessons did we learn until now? And I really look forward to hear from Katarzyna Wenles, if what is her view on of the flow, how should Frontex go there, and what could Frontex do in this situation? Member states are silent as well, and they say that they stand by the EU countries. But what I did not hear so far is real solidarity in the sense of preparedness of taking part in relocation of asylum seekers, for instance. So this is also something I think that we should look at what could member states do in this situation in order to stop those violations. Lastly, what I want to say is this is not an isolated incident. I mean, we are confronted for a number of years already with allegations of pushbacks at the border, refusal of entry. And so far, the EU institutions have not effectively addressed this. It's going on, and it seems to become even more blatant, open, actually, and structural. So this is not an isolated, it seems that by a lack of enforcement, we only inspire other countries to do the same. Also, the threat by Lukashenko is not isolated. We have seen it earlier with Turkey, with Morocco, and I think it's really important also for our own interest to reconsider our external policies, and specifically our cooperation on migration, where we tend to shift our responsibility, make agreements on the prevention of departure and readmission, where we make ourselves maybe vulnerable to these threats in case of a conflict. Well, this panel is not about this whole comprehensive development, but it could be a first start to reconsider our policies on enforcement and on also dealing with third countries. I would like to give the floor back to the moderator, to Lina, and I really look forward to the contributions of all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tineke Strik. And I think we have a unique opportunity also to hear from the people who are witnessing the situation on the ground. So I will move now straight ahead to Askedar Mashtevicine, who is Ethiopian refugee herself in Europe, however, already Lithuanian citizen and activist, and a very active refugee rights defender, and part of also global networks of refugees. So Askedar has been very actively responding to what's happened at the borders in Lithuania, and she has been providing some even clothing for people in detention camps. So could you please tell us now what is the situation in Lithuania and what are the current laws? Because one of the main concerns we have heard that Lithuania has tried also to legitimize illegal pushbacks by calling them legitimate turn-around policy. So Askedar, please elaborate what is the situation in Lithuania at the moment.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It is quite a challenging time for Lithuania, because Lithuania, I think for a long time was, I can say, a very supportive citizen for other countries. I myself, I was resettled from Malta. That was like in 2007. And I was one of the first refugees in Lithuanian history to be resettled from other member states. Having said that, and knowing what we went through for the past, I don't know, 14 years, there are a lot of changes happening. I can say that, you know, a lot of positive change, and of course, the number of refugees resettled from Greece and other member states like Malta has also increased. But because of the pandemics, we know that the challenges are becoming like multifaceted. Right now we have the challenge of the pandemic, and then we have the challenge of migration. So for Lithuania, even if it is like 4,000 people, over 4,000 people this year, for a country which was receiving, I don't know, about 100 people per year, it was a huge challenge. First of all, we don't really have even lawyers who have the knowledge of migration law and who could be defending the right of migrants. Second, we don't really have facilities all over the country where we could, I don't know, keep the people or reside them. We had like 2 detention centers, let's say one detention center and one integration center, which is in Rukla and Pabrade, but they do not fit to accommodate that many people. So I think the influx through Belarus, it came as a surprise, because Lithuania, even if Lithuania knows what kind of neighbor we have in the east, they were not expecting that people would be flying in from Far East to Lithuania, and with all the challenges which were facing with the pandemics, again handle, you know, like the influx of people in thousands in months. So at that time, I think it has created some kind of I don't know, chaos, and the government was not ready to handle that. And because of that, I can say that we have passed a regulation which violates human rights, and which also makes Lithuania not to follow international agreements like the Refugee Convention. It was kept aside, and we just passed a law that whoever is crossing through Belarus to Lithuania is going to be seen as a criminal who is supporting Lukashenko to achieve his goal. But the fact is that those people are, you know, suffering as much as Lithuania is, because they've been told that, you know, they will have a safe passage to Europe, and after that, their documents were taken away from them in Belarus, and they were pushed into Lithuanian territory, where in some cases we've seen that even Belarusian forces were entering Lithuanian territory without, you know, like crossing to Lithuanian territory or the EU territory without any visa forcefully. So I think at this time, I mean, a lot of things are being tasted. One is like the European Union and the democracy we're propagating and the human rights we stand for. So when the challenge comes, if we are becoming the tyrants, you know, where people are suffering and dying, and we see that happening, and we are part of that, you know, in pushing back and seeing, I don't know, children with mothers, you know, being pushed away, and the weather is becoming like it's getting colder, and people died because of hypothermia on the borders. So it's a challenging time for Europe, because you know, as a Lithuanian citizen, I have all the, you know, those kind of feelings going through myself. It's like, what can you do as a sovereign country protecting your border? But from the other side, I've been on the other side of the aisle also as well. You know, I crossed to Malta as an illegal migrant, right? And then I was accepted as a refugee, and I integrated, and I'm part of the society today. But those people are, you know, in the same situation as I was like 14, 15 years ago. So I think people like myself, we could do more, like in facilitating the conversation between both camps, you know, the government and also the refugee community or the migrants community. In a way, it's not an easy time. So that's why I believe that my input, or, you know, going to communities to speak to them, saying that you know, if we build a camp around your area, you know, it doesn't mean that we're putting you in at risk of, you know, being, I don't know, being attacked or whatever. And those people are coming bare hand, you know, and we have the police and Frontex also helping Lithuania in security, in case of security. So we need the dialogue, and the dialogue need to happen. I think in all stages, from the community, like at the place on the ground, to European level. Like can a sovereign country just, you know, change the rules just like that, and, you know, and the things which we see in Poland, like Polish Belarus border and Lithuanian Belarus border, or Latvian Belarus border, does it has to happen this way, the way it is being taken care of? So yeah, that's why I think we are here, and that's why we're talking about that, so that we come up with a solution. So but I believe that three part of the society need to take responsibility. One is the government, by being honest and open on the things which is happening at the borders. You know, if we are telling the society that you are safe, we are building the walls, and then they see thousands of people coming in, they will have hardship trusting the government. So I think we should tell what is happening and the reality, that we don't really have physical border which stops people from crossing. I've been driving around the borders, and you know, some places it's even hard to build any wall or any fence, because it's the border between the two countries is a river. You know, you cannot build anything there.
Thank you,
and as Tineke said, you know, we cannot say that, you know, they are at no man's border. We see those people, they have faces, they have names, they have nationalities and origin, and they are human beings, and they're getting cold, and they're starving, and there are children, and they are dying too. So we cannot just close our eyes and say nothing is happening. So the question is, what is Europe going to do, and how far is the, I don't know, the ethics and the humanity of each member state will, I don't know, stretch in seeing how people are suffering there. But I will not, like, I can't also defend, you know, the fact, or I cannot denounce the fact that the enemy is, you know, right at the border, which is the Belarusian government, which is not even legitimately elected government. So
thank you.
That's the thing we need to keep in mind.
Thank you so much, Askedar. And I think in Lithuanian context, there is still this high confusion of this political level and what's happening with Belarus. And then there is this issue of refugee rights and what's happening with the people. So thank you so much for highlighting the situation. Just this morning, I being myself Lithuanian, I felt my duty to get informed. So Human Rights Committee has been asking various questions for the Ministry of Interior and the Border Agency. Apparently, all 570 applications that have been submitted for asylum in the camps have been declared as unlawful and rejected. So also apparently the law currently goes, or at least application of the law, that person either needs to arrive to the Lithuanian border lawfully and with relevant visa at the border point in order to apply for asylum. And some ombudsman persons institutions reported already that people just have been indiscriminately pushed back to Belarusian territories. So a lot of questions of concern. That there has been also new initiative, or when the law has been changed, that some people could apply at the embassies, Lithuanian embassies abroad. However, only some kind of concrete measures or decrees how this could be done are passed only now, while the law of return policy applies from August. So just some news from on Lithuanian side from this committee that took place yesterday. And I would like to turn to Thomas Cheno, who is witnessing situation in Poland, and being professor of law and active also defender of the rule of law. It's really interesting. What's the situation there? What issues do you see? And what about this relationship of the rule of law, fundamental rights, and democracy that I think you are rightly placed to elaborate on?
Thank you very much and good morning. I think if I have 7 minutes to talk about the rule of law challenges in Poland, that would not be even a starting point. So I would just jump into the issues, how they relate to the rule of law actually in the border context. So the problem of pushbacks in Poland is not a new issue. I've been talking about that, and civil society organizations have been alarming about that in the past. but they were always concerning the railroad between Brest and Terespol, which was a train that majority of asylum seekers were coming to Poland. And in some critical years, there was 95% of pushbacks out of those that were coming on the train. So there were special compartments for asylum seekers that they were buying return trip from Brest, because this was the rule that you had to have the return ticket, and they were actually mostly rejected. And it has been condemned by the European Court for Human Rights in some cases, especially MK and others against Poland in the year 2000, 23rd of July. But the situation was not actual anymore, because we have changed the rules concerning crossing the borders, and since the 13th of March, during COVID 2020, we are not having any train connection with Belarus anymore. So the only way to get here to Poland is to have their own car, or to go illegally, because there are no border crossings where you can just walk through that would be active, and file for asylum at the border crossing that is open. So this is forcing a bit the people that are at the border to take this illegal attempt, let's say, of crossing the border. And today is a very special day, because it's the 7th of October, so it's the first anniversary of the first client of the Rule of Law Institute that has gone through this route. Because yesterday we had an anniversary where the Belarusian state has waived protection of its own border. They've disconnected the so-called Sistema, the former Soviet Union system of protection of the border, and the border guards from Belarus have started to ignore illegal crossings of the border. And right now, as we hear, probably even they stimulate the illegal crossings of the border. It doesn't matter for the evaluation of the grounds of persecution that the people are facing back there. So we are observing this for a year, and in December last year we were issuing the letters to the commander-in-chief of the border guards to say that there is a new illegal route that is being produced, and that there are some issues, human rights violations of the border that we observe of the people that have been stopped at the border in 2020. Yet it has started like a snowball, afterwards, and especially after spring this year. Right now, it reached the situation that since August, the border guards reported that they have prevented illegal entry of about 10,000 people, or 10,000 attempts of illegal entries. Of course, those were multiple attempts of many people. So I don't know if there's hundreds or thousands of people waiting for the attempt to get to Europe and file for asylum. During this time, since August last year, Polish border guards have stopped. They reported to stop about 1,300 people that were stopped at the border, and unfortunately, all of them virtually were detained. Actually, everybody that has crossed the border from the very beginning illegally has been charged with a crime and has been detained, including children, people with serious torture evidence, and pregnant women. Everybody. We've been helping hundreds, maybe already, of people that has crossed the border since that, and we know reported cases of serious vulnerabilities that were not detected at the border. So what is going on right now? This is prevention of illegal entry. This is how the Polish state is describing this thing, and it's actually not a prevention, because people are stopped very often, a couple of kilometers inside of the Polish territories, and they are, as we see and we hear, in many cases, definitely not in all, definitely maybe not in 50% of cases, that they are declaring that they want to apply for asylum or international protection, because to make things more complicated, asylum in Polish law is something slightly different than international protection. So Polish border guards are saying, if you ask for asylum, then you are not protected against non-refoulement. So if somebody asks for asylum, that's despite the fact that it's an international word, Polish border guards are saying the non-refoulement principle does not defend you. So this is quite, let's say, vicious from them. What are the issues of human rights violations that I can identify within 5 minutes? There is very many of them. So starting with the first one, not providing access to asylum procedures. This is a violation of the Schengen Border Code, Article 3 and 4, I would say, says that, somebody that is asking for protection can cross the border without visa. And in Poland, the lack of visa is a major ground for rejection. And right now, the special lower acts of the Ministry of Interior is a legal basis for the border guards to reject people, not to accept them at the border if they cross the border without special titles that were listed after the 13th of March 2020. In COVID times, we have special COVID regulations, and the exemption of people applying for asylum in Poland is not listed in this document. So all border guards are saying we are just following orders, we are following the law, and we cannot accept them because only the citizens of various countries can do it with visas. Even the visa-free regime is not allowing you to cross the border without special aim that was listed in this regulation of the Ministry of Interior. So this is the first one, not providing access to asylum. Collective expulsion, I'm sure, because the groups of people that are coming here are sometimes there are 50, 80, or over 100. And nobody really pays attention to the individual grounds for escape from the country of origin or for crossing Belarusian territory. So this is a violation of Article 4, Protocol 4 of the European Convention for Human Rights. Not registering applications for international protection at the border. This is the third one. We've studied that, and we've asked the regional unit of the border guards on the Polish-Belarusian border in December, how many Eurodac devices they have. And for 17 units, they had only 5 devices. So the rule is that the commander of the unit that stops the person that is applying for international protection has to register that application in Eurodac. But only 5 of them have those devices, so they would have to transport the person to different location and to do it, and it takes time. They don't do it. The border guards commander has said, but we can do it in a special ink form, that it may be done with ink in the old traditional police way that you have the ink fingerprints. And we've asked follow-up the question, so how many times have you done it? Zero. Last year it was 0 of those people. So right now maybe it has changed, but it was the early days. Number 4 is the starting in all cases return procedures, despite the clear declarations that people are asking for asylum. In all of the cases, Polish border guards are starting return procedures. They are first launching the return administrative procedure, and they suspend it after the person asks for asylum in detention. But first of all of them have return procedures. In many cases, the return order is issued the same date, and the person that is stopped signs that he waives his right to appeal. This is very, very, tricky what they do, and they don't have the right to appeal. We have many cases of people that didn't know what they signed, and they have a right, they waive their right to appeal in return cases. And then when asylum claim fails in detention with no luck to access to a lawyer, they may be returned almost legally, we say. So this is also a violation of principle of non-refoulement and we know one example. We had a volunteer for Navalny that came to Poland and says, I'm leaving the country because of the political persecutions. And this is in the protocol. Mm-hmm. So it was the answer. Have you been persecuted in the country? Are you having a fear of persecution? Yes, I do. And they did not start asylum procedure. And they issued the return order and notified Russian embassy about his stopping. This is a very, very, big violation of that. And, it's not an unique example. I think that in all of the cases, the stopping border guards unit is notifying the embassy of the country of origin about stopping the person that has crossed the border illegally, because it's the conventional rule that we, with countries that we have relations, we notify about any arrested person. And this is, with my Chechen clients, all of them have been asked in the country of origin, their families, what is your father or son or daughter doing in Poland? Why she was stopped in Poland? And in all of the cases, Polish state, within 3 days, is notifying Russian embassy. I got many of those examples of faxes to Russian embassy from the local unit to the Russian ambassador. This is the list of people that were stopped. So this is a huge violation of the rights of asylum seekers not to be put in danger against their own country. Number 6 violation that I think is the starting in all cases criminal procedures. This is horrible. In all of the cases, the criminal procedures have been initiated that we've researched in all of the cases, and persons that were crossed the border, they are asked, have you crossed the border in an illegal way? Yes, I have. Yes. So do you plead guilty of doing that? Yes, I plead guilty. And they issue the suspended verdicts, against the Article 31.1 of Geneva Convention, that there is a depenalization of illegal crossing of the borders of people that are looking for asylum, and they are forced to accept this criminal responsibility. Last time I've talked, on Sunday to the pregnant woman, 8-month pregnant, that was interrogated for 3 hours and forced to admit that she has committed a crime, and she pled guilty. Okay, number 7, the final one.
Tomasz, we would like to move it, and maybe during questions we could bring that in.
Just for last 2 violations in detention, all of them in the lengthy detention, and extending those detention again without the contact to lawyers. So this is a violation that I would mention here. Thank you, and sorry for going over my time slot.
Thank you. It's definitely very relevant to hear these concrete examples and concrete violations. And I think since Frontex colleagues are still about to join us, maybe we can make a bit of a detour and to move to Christian Momers, who is advisor to the Council of Europe, Commissioner of Human Rights. And we know that a commissioner has been very active in reacting to what's happening in Poland and Lithuania, and issued some kind of letters like what the commissioner has been doing and what are the main violations you have witnessed. And yeah, from Lithuanian colleagues, I just heard that actually commissioner was seen as the only international institution who has seriously reacted to the situation on the ground.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, especially for the previous speakers, because I think it puts a lot of things in perspective, which I cannot give from Strasbourg. But let me start by explaining that the Commissioner for Human Rights, who's currently Dunja Mijatovic, is an independent body with a mandate to promote compliance with human rights in the 47 member states of the Council of Europe, which include all EU member states. So my focus will be on their obligations, particularly under the Council of Europe instruments, especially the European Convention on Human Rights, and not EU law, which has already been addressed a little bit, and maybe other speakers will talk about this. It's also important to mention that while Belarus is not a member state of the Council of Europe and is not a party to the ECHR, the Commissioner has been cooperating with Belarusian civil society on many human rights issues over recent years, and made a number of statements in recent months concerning this country, focusing on the need to protect human rights defenders and to stop and investigate large-scale human rights violations in the aftermath of the presidential elections. Also to say that the Commissioner has not visited Lithuania or Poland during the latest period when the border situation with Belarus arose. But the Commissioner has followed this situation, including by drawing on information by national human rights bodies and civil society. Although, for example, due to the emergency measures preventing access to border regions in Poland, this is obviously more difficult, as well as international partners, and in the case of Lithuania, written dialogue with the government. While the Commissioner has addressed many different border situations across Europe, the current situation, as we've already heard, is particularly characterized by member states' accusations of Belarus engaging in hybrid attacks, which they say necessitates certain actions at their borders. And I just want to clarify that the Commissioner has condemned such actions by Belarus that are putting individuals in a human rights or humanitarian emergency, and increases pressures on receiving states. And so have others, like recently the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which are representatives of the parliaments of the 47 member states. But at the same time, and this was also mentioned, this cannot be the end of the story, because it doesn't bring us to principled or practical solutions for the people who are caught in the middle. And Council of Europe member states, despite the situation, retain their own obligations under human rights law. And for this reason, the Commissioner has called on member states to ensure that human rights do not become subordinate to geopolitical or political considerations. More concretely, in August, the Commissioner expressed several concerns in an exchange of letters with the Lithuanian Prime Minister, as was mentioned. And in particular, she noted that newly adopted amendments to legislation could remove safeguards in the asylum procedure, which could undermine the prohibition of refoulement and the right to effective remedies. And she also addressed the fact that vulnerable persons, such as unaccompanied minors, could be diverted to accelerated procedures, and that the restrictions imposed on asylum seekers and migrants in reception centers ran the risk of amounting to de facto detention. She also specifically highlighted the need to ensure persons would not be returned at the border without an individual identification or procedure, which since then clearly appears to have become a bigger issue. For Poland, the Commissioner issued a statement on the situation of people stuck at the border with Belarus on the 25th of August. And she expressed concern about pushbacks and denial of access to asylum, or simply leaving them stuck in a humanitarian emergency, which she highlighted could not be the answer of a Council of Europe member state bound by the ECHR, the Refugee Convention, and other human rights instruments. So she called for immediate action to find a solution to protect the rights of people stuck there and to ensure that their humanitarian needs are met. She called to allow access to organizations providing humanitarian and legal assistance and enabling persons to apply for international protection, to which they might well be entitled. More recently, the Commissioner reacted to the reports of several people found dead at the border, and stressed that those left in limbo at the border are victims and not a threat, and calling again for a humanitarian solution to be urgently found, especially in light of the worsening weather conditions. Several of these points, as Tineke Strik mentioned, have been the subject of interim measures by the court in relation to Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And while some of these have been withdrawn because the people involved had been given access to the territory or were no longer in the border areas, some remain in effect. And it's important to emphasize that member states are required to implement such interim measures to guarantee the protection of the ECHR. I want to briefly, towards the end of my comments, focus on the issue of pushbacks, which indeed are becoming more normalized and often silently condoned by member states in the Council of Europe area widely, so not just in the EU. And in this context, various Council of Europe member states have argued that such actions may be justified, in this case because of the actions by Belarus. And while the court has in very specific cases found that returns without individual identification or assessment did not violate the prohibition of collective expulsion, the Commissioner has called for caution in too easily translating the court's very complex and context-specific findings to each and every border situations where circumstances may be very different. And for example, the court has also connected its finding to the existence of genuine and effective possibilities to ask for lawful entry, including claiming asylum. In this context, it's also important to emphasize that the prohibition of torture or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment under Article 3 of the Convention is absolute. There's no provision in the ECHR that allows member states to violate the prohibition because another member state is misbehaving or instrumentalizing migration flows, even in emergency situations. Article 3 may arise in several ways in the current situation. First, of course, if state authorities would mistreat refugees or migrants. But second, also, if people are returned to Belarus and would subsequently be at risk of being returned onward to the country of origin where they may face violations. And this requires, for example, a thorough examination of the availability of protection, such as an effective asylum procedure in Belarus to protect against such onward return. At any rate, risks cannot be assessed on the basis of a general presumption that a specific country of origin is automatically safe. Third, the return to Belarus itself might amount to a violation of Article 3. And it's not only relevant to assess whether maybe Belarus would in some way abuse persons who have been returned, but also whether those who are pushed back by member states would get stuck in a dire humanitarian situation, as we are seeing now, which may also amount to inhuman or degrading treatment, and as we have unfortunately seen, may also impact on the right to life, and the protection of that, of course, also entails further obligations on member states. In the situation with Belarus, there have been discussions about when people actually come within the jurisdiction of member states, and so when they can actually be held responsible under the ECHR. And this is especially the case if it's argued that people formally find themselves on the other side of the border. But there can be no doubt of member states' responsibilities when they actually take people from their territories and move them across the border. But this may also well be the case when border guards are actively using force or the threat of force to prevent people from entering, especially if this leaves them in a humanitarian situation or without access to asylum. So while in terms of the law, some of these issues may require further elaboration by the court, and this is a process that is somewhat slow, so this cannot keep up with developments on the ground, the Commissioner has clarified that upholding human rights requires member states to act in good faith and in the spirit of their international obligations, which must be aimed first and foremost at ensuring that people are effectively protected from treatment prohibited by the ECHR and other human rights instruments. And states' cooperation with civil society and national human rights bodies, as well as international organizations like UNHCR, and ensuring their access to people in need is also crucial in this respect. There's obviously much more to be said, but I will leave my remarks here and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Christian. Perfectly on time. So thank you for providing this very wide overview and also assessing against the regional and international human rights benchmarks this situation. Now let's move to the Commission representative. So we actually have Tom Snells from the cabinet of Commissioner Ylva Johansson, who is responsible for these issues in the EU. And I would like maybe to start conversation with you, because in Lithuania and Poland, there are a lot of already allusions to the new upcoming EU Migration and Asylum Pact, and member states even behave as if it's already legally applicable, thinking even for pre-entry procedure or so on. So could you give a clarity on this point, which are the legal binding instruments at the moment, and how you would assess the situation at the border? And maybe one more question, because yesterday we heard also Commissioner Johansson to state that actions of Belarus could be considered as state-sponsored migrant smuggling. So in this regard, should the refugees and asylum seekers and other migrants coming through the border be treated as victims of migrant smuggling under EU's Victims Directive? Or if you would have any clarity on that, how then states should interpret what is the situation of those people? Of course, situation is very complex and difficult, and Commission is having, I guess, difficult times to oversee what's happening. So the floor is yours, and please highlight what EU can do or is doing at the moment.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to Mrs. Strik also for reaching out for this. This is a super interesting, valuable discussion, and so I have to really focus my intervention because a lot of questions have been raised and a lot of points have been made. But I indeed maybe just make 3 points and then react briefly to a few points that have been said by the different speakers so far. So first of all, I think there are two sides to the border, right? So I think I've heard that from many of the speakers that we have to first look at the Belarusian side of the border, and I think I agree with virtually everything that that Mrs. Strik has said in that respect, also with Lukashenko, the government, the elections, the critical situation that we have there. And I think to react, Nina, to your question here immediately, yes, I think from our side, I think we see that Lukashenko, who is not recognized, is launching an attack on the European Union, but possibly worse, it's an attack on the kind of multilateral rights-based system that we have, and it's an attack on fundamental rights itself. It's an attack on the Geneva Convention, because the way we see this, and I think a lot of points have been made about the Belarusian border guards and the behavior. I think we see this indeed as a state-sponsored criminal activity, which is in contravention of many UN conventions, including the one on transnational organized crime, and the annexes to that instrument. I've heard from the Council of Europe representative, that Belarus is largely outside of those instruments, but they are not outside of the law. So I think first of all we need to address that part, because I think indeed the right to asylum is at stake here, and I think it's being abused. So what we have done is to reach out also with the UNHCR, IOM, with third countries to address the international context behind that. We have applied sanctions on the Lukashenko regime. They are working. We have applied more sanctions. There are different rounds. Last week, the Commission also proposed to further restrictions on certain arrangements in relation to a visa. So I think it shows that our actions are working, and we have somebody who is not recognized, who's becoming more and more desperate. And there is a financial dimension to this. I mean, we have been at the border. The commissioner has been there. I accompanied her in August at the Lithuanian Belarusian border. We spoke to people that arrived there, and they have bought a package trip. Most of the arrivals in August came from Iraq, and they spent thousands of euros, and over the 10,000 mark even. A package trip, they were deceived, and they arrived at the border, and they were very surprised because they have been deceived and they have been instrumentalized, as we have said. And this is really, I mean, human beings are deceived and are misused for a desperate dictator in Belarus who's infringing international law. So I think a lot of efforts have gone in to stop those planes from coming in the first place, and people ending up in a situation which is dangerous, and we have seen in Poland even lethal. So I think that is the first point of concern. That I think that is the area where we also have to focus. Secondly, I think the situation in Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland is not exactly the same. We have, first of all, we have engaged with Lithuania because that was where the first arrivals came. We went to Lithuania, had many meetings. We have had a relatively good cooperation with the government. We had daily contacts with the team of the Minister of the Interior. We have had daily contacts with international organizations that were operational on the ground. We've ensured that people who were in need of help, were helped. And I think that's one point where I would react to what Mrs. Strik said. There's been a lot of solidarity from member states on this. I think there were 15, 16 EU member states that have reacted under the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, who've sent aid to the border, to people. I mean, the border was accessible to international organizations, to journalists. The European Commission has been there. The services, DG Home, have been there several times to reach out and to engage with the authorities, also to look at the legal side of the story, and those discussions continue. Latvia was the next member state that was under attack, and now the situation has moved to Poland. Commissioner was in Warsaw last week to speak with the Minister of the Interior. They agreed that a mission of Commission officials would be welcomed in Poland this week. That happened over the last 2 days, and we agreed with the Polish government that next week those missions will continue, and there will be visits to the border. There will be weekly meetings to discuss also the legal framework, the extension of the emergency legislation, and there will be a fixed contact points to ensure that indeed we get first of all more transparency at the border, because without transparency we don't know what is going on. And I think here it should be said that it is not purely a Polish border. This is a European Union external border for which the Polish authorities have responsibility on behalf of all member states to manage this, in a European way. And that European way is not a one-sided way. And I think here I really appreciate what Eskedar said, where there is indeed a balance to be struck between, on the one side, an efficient human protection of the external border, but on the other side also fundamental rights. And this is not an either-or discussion. This is an and discussion. And I will come back to your question on the pact, because that is also one of the principles underpinning the pact. So here, we believe that there is a huge benefit of having the European Union present at the borders, not only the Commission, but also the Union agencies, and in particular Frontex. I mean, the mandate of Frontex, and Mrs. Strik knows this perfectly well, better than I do, which is set out in an excellent report of the Parliament. It is both to ensure a European integrated border management, which is compatible and fully in line with fundamental rights. The whole Frontex regulation reflects this balance to be made, and I understand that will be a representative of the team of the human rights team of Frontex, which is being built up slowly, too slowly, but surely, to ensure that a European presence at the border can reflect that balance, border management, but also fundamental rights. In Lithuania, there are more than 100 Frontex officials there. EASO is there to help also processing, because indeed we also spoke with the Lithuanian border guards. They had never seen the situation before, and I think they really tried to make the best out of a really desperate situation. There were families there also with small children, and they were really trying to do their best to help. But of course, they are not the experts in this matter, certainly not on asylum law, and that's why also EASO absolutely needs to be present. And this is something we are discussing with the Polish authorities, also to ensure that Frontex and EASO can be present there as a minimum. And it's not a question of can we manage alone, because I think the state of emergency said something about that. But it's to have a European presence there. My third point, a last point, is indeed on the pact. 1 year ago, we've put on the table a pact to kind of re-Europeanize migration management, and also in particular asylum, European asylum rules, which reflect this balance between, on the one side, a right to asylum, and on the other side, but this is a more complex picture, of course. There are different dimensions to this, but also border management. And we have put forward a screening proposal, a screening regulation at the border, which is also composed of those two critical elements. Border procedures, but on the other side, an independent monitoring mechanism at the border to ensure that that actions taken at the borders, the European external borders, are in line with fundamental rights. And this is something that we've also been in very close discussions with other borders, other member states to set that up. Now, I think this is maybe the one point I disagree with Mrs. Strik. I think the situation with Belarus is not comparable to the situation that we have on the southeastern borders or the southwestern borders. I think this is quite a unique situation where we have somebody who assumes power, who for not only political benefit but also financial benefit is organizing an international state-sponsored smuggling scheme. So I don't think we can compare the situation with the other borders. However, and that's a point that has been made about pushbacks, I think, from our side, it's quite clear we are not, not silently condoning violent and illegal pushbacks. We have a firm position on that, and I think this is something that is absolutely not acceptable, because it doesn't matter whether on one side of the border there is a criminal abusing people, or there are violent pushbacks at the borders cannot be accepted. And that's where I would like to come back to, I think, a point that that Tomasz was made, but the Schengen Border Code. I think indeed there's Article 3 and 4, but if you read on, there's also Article 5 and Article 6, which says that that there are no open borders. I mean, it is possible to, even in emergency situations, to recalibrate the border crossing points, but they have to be open. And even the Polish government agreed in the Council recommendation in the context of COVID that borders cannot be closed fully and completely, even with a global pandemic. There is an exception for essential travel, and asylum applicants are qualified as essential travelers. I mean, it sounds a bit strange, but they should have access to a legal border crossing point, which can be managed, which can be orderly, which can be organized, and which, of course, here the reference to Eurodac, there should be plugged into the European integrated border management system, but that should be a possibility. So, I mean, that's the difference between pushback and a redirection to a legal border crossing point, because what we have seen at the Lithuanian border, indeed, the situation there is quite strange. There's virtually nothing. There's green, there are rivers, there are lakes. And we have on the other side the Belarusian border guards, who until recently were actually paid to protect irregular departures from their territory, to protect their border. And now those incentives have been dropped, and they've been removing border infrastructure on their side to encourage border crossing. So that puts people in a really difficult situation. But once people come in a difficult situation at the border, on the border, and certainly in the EU territory, then there is an obligation to help them. I mean, we cannot accept that people die. So that is quite clear, and that's why we need humanitarian assistance, our agencies present, and also access from press and from NGOs to make sure that there is sufficient transparency. So there are a lot of more points I can make, but I guess I stop here, and I'm happy to react to questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Tom Snells. There are more questions indeed coming up, and my colleague Jean-Luc is helping to collect them all. So maybe just an immediately reaction, like, should virtual impossibility to apply to asylum be seen? Would the European Court of Justice judgment in the Hungarian case, would it still be seen as applicable? Because we see somehow there is more exceptionalism created for Polish and Lithuanian situation. If you could just briefly comment on that.
Well, I think the court's rulings obviously have to be respected, and we would have a very long seminar if we would talk about Poland indeed on that basis. But indeed, I think it should be always possible to have access to an asylum procedure. First of all, access to a legal border crossing point, and then access to the procedure. And that procedure then also should be correct, of course. I mean, it cannot be that if you don't use the right word, then you are deceived and you have no right to appeal. I mean, that is not possible. So there should be an efficient, fair, and transparent procedure at the border clearly. So I think when those cases will come, and I'm sure they will come, they will be assessed by the court. And then from our side, we are there to work together with the 3 member states that are most concerned to help them, on the legal side in relation to the compatibility of the legislation with the EU acquis and with fundamental rights and with international law, to ensure that they are applied also in a transparent and correct manner, and to avoid, of course, having to take member states to court, or that member states lose cases in courts, because our role is there to ensure that the treaties and the EU law is applied. But we try to do that in a cooperative way, because again, at the other side of the border, we have a much bigger issue here. So I think the unity of the member states and the support of the Commission to the 3 member states most concerned immediately is really important.
Thank you so much, Tom Snells. And we have from the audience, Agnieszka Kubal asking Professor Tomasz Shinov about the relationship between acts of the parliament in Poland and the Geneva Convention, or the rights, or the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Shouldn't the international obligations take the precedence over simple legislative acts? So here again, can maybe also making question more general, can member states just issue and legitimize certain practices, and how this should be addressed in your opinion?
Thank you very much. So to answer this question, I think we have to make a distinction between general acts of international law that take precedence over statutes, and also specific EU law regulations that they in the Constitution they have even stronger value in our legal context. So the Article 91 of Polish Constitution says that the international agreements that have been ratified should be somehow reconciled, or the statute should be reconciled with international agreements that are binding upon Poland. And when the legal act of international organization is issued, and this international organization is established like European Union, then the laws that are issued by EU shall be applied directly and have precedence in the event of conflict of laws. So this is very straightforward. So like Schengen border code is directly applicable in Poland, and you cannot really modify its
We lost you, Thomas. Maybe switching off camera would help.
On the rights of a child is part of our legal system, and they should be applicable with the full strength. That's how I would say, based on the constitutional provision.
And I would like to pose a bit more general question that was posed by Anastasia. What strategies are available for the EU to resolve the issues? Should the new sanctions implemented to stop immigration from Belarus? And I'm looking, I guess, also to Tineke Strik and to Tom Snells. And yeah, how you would see what are the key responses? And I guess here is the question more about this political situation with Belarus.
So shall I start then? Yeah, this is the $1 billion question. I think we're all looking for ways to stop this policy of and the whole regime actually of Lukashenko at the moment. And I think indeed that we really should consider the effectiveness of the targeted sanctions that we have right now. If we should not and could not be able to do more. Also in order to support civil society in Belarus, because I think in the end, you know, the reforms, the regime change has to come from inside. I think it's very difficult to enforce that, but we should do everything what we can. So try to indeed put more sanctions on Lukashenko, make it not rewarding anymore for him to keep on doing this, and at the same time also make sure that also for migrants it's not rewarding to let themselves being subjected to these policies. And I think, but then of course clearly in line with our EU law and fundamental rights. So I think in that sense it would be important to have swift access to an asylum procedure with swift and careful examination of the asylum request, so that people know very quickly if they are can be granted protection or need to be returned, and then make sure that this return is also feasible, which is also of course a challenge on itself. So I don't say that it's an easy situation, but this response, you know, keeping people there in a limbo without, well, deprived of all the rights that they have, is definitely not the right answer. So I think we should try to step up our efforts on both sides, actually, to stop this from going on.
Thank you so much.
Can I add a word to that, Lina? So I fully agree with Tineke Strik on that, and I would just only add two things. One is at this very moment, my boss, Commissioner Johansson, is hosting the Resettlement Plus Forum, if I could call it that way, which looks in a very comprehensive way how we can help people fleeing from Afghanistan and from the region, and offering legal and safe pathways, resettlement pathways to the European Union. So we should not stop immigration. I mean, but we should. I mean, to make it clear, there are, I think, every year in a normal year, there are 3 million people that are coming in, and getting residence permits in the European Union. In 3 million. There's 1.5, I think, you know, more or less. I mean, COVID, of course, was a bit of a special situation, but the 1.5 million net immigration to the EU. And without migration, the European Union would lose 500,000 of people every year. And I mean, that is, I think, you know, is not the right direction. So we need migration, but we need legal migration. We need also to help people who are fleeing from being prosecuted or fleeing from situations like Afghanistan, but in a resettlement, you know, in a safe, orderly, organized way, you know, that they don't risk their life, because there's also a big gender dimension to this, because most of people that arrive in an irregular, unsafe, and I think 99.9% of every person that arrives in the European Union in an irregular way, that crosses the border in an irregular way, 99.9% pay money to organized criminal groups. In the situation of Belarus, even to, you know, somebody who actually has the power. So we should avoid that, because 99.9% pay to organized criminal groups, but also most people that arrive like that are men. And the women, children, vulnerable people, you know, are left behind. So resettlement is also kind of more gender balanced, safe way to come to the EU. And then one point that was mentioned, indeed, what happens if the opposition, you know, the opposition from Lukashenko arrive at the Polish border and they can't pass? That is hugely problematic, because we all know that they are fleeing and their life is in danger. So I mean, that is, you know, that is the right to asylum, and we have to preserve that.
May I add very briefly to that, because I also completely agree with that, and we also see that there are so many Afghan asylum seekers at the border. I mean, at the same time, we see in what situations they are in Afghanistan themselves. Therefore, it's also shameful that the ministers in their Justice and Home Affairs declaration a few weeks ago mainly said everyone should be kept in the region. And and I really hope that the Resettlement Forum will lead to concrete pledges also, but because I also really agree that if we have a normal policy of legal and safe ways, there is less opportunity, less possibility for an autocratic regime to use this kind of traveling, routing for people just for their genuine need for protection.
Actually, at CEPS and with colleagues, we are doing a lot of research on migrant smuggling, and what new evidence is showing that increasingly self-organized travels are on rise. So the idea of criminal organizations being behind maybe not always is part of reality, but however, it's part often of the narrative about migrant smuggling. Here we have another related question from Jose Antonio Moreno, who is member of Economic and Social Committee and good colleague of ours concerned with the rule of law and role of civil society. And he's posing precisely the question, what about the role of civil society that is responding to those rights of refugees and migrants? What are the attitudes toward them, and aren't they under attack? And I see Thomas, raising a hand. So yeah, please go ahead, and maybe Eskedar also would like to comment.
I think that civil society organizations are in a difficult situation in our region, in Poland especially. I think during the last 5 years, we've had quite restricted access to EU funding from AMIF, from Asylum Migration Integration Fund. The legal aid for refugees has been much limited. I can speak for the whole sector of the organizations that have downsized, by 70%, I think, the legal aid to asylum seekers. Because the access to funds was much smaller. And right now, I believe there is always a tension because public media are showing any type of support to refugees as irrational maybe or irresponsible. And the public perception from public media, I think maybe that really we are naive and stupid, that we are helping really the regime of Lukashenko of when we try to take care of problems of people that are crossing the borders, not helping them to cross the border, but accessing to them after they cross the border, or accessing and helping them in the detention centers. So this is generally the very important point to make. I participate in the Polish church discussions on that, and the Polish Episcopate, the Conference of Bishops, has raised this issue to start supporting NGOs that are helping refugees in Poland. That support has been limited. So there is quite a big challenge for the NGOs that are right now raising money individually. I think on some Facebook actions. I wanted also to intervene here that Afghanis are constituting, I think, from what I see, about 1/3 of those people that are coming right now to Poland in an irregular way, and those that are detained. And the Afghani immigration, I think it's one of the best, let's say, groups that I've worked with. I know that it doesn't matter if somebody's.
We lost Thomas again. Maybe if the sound doesn't back, let's move to Eskedar. Sorry, Thomas, maybe you can continue your thought afterwards. Eskedar, could you comment about the role of civil society? Because in Lithuania, we heard that there was at least already one case where a young woman previously had a lot of volunteering work experience, who had been kind of accused or is under suspicion that while hosting 5 Afghani nationals, while they were waiting from the European Court of Human Rights interim response order, that she might be somehow involved in facilitation of irregular migration. And we feel that it was actually for us today very difficult to find Lithuanian representative, because it seems civil society is kind of unwilling to speak out or unwilling to criticize the government's actions. So Eskedar, could you a bit portray what is the situation for civil society?
Maybe before touching this point, I will get back to the previous discussion. Just a little bit. I want to touch like the access to safe pathways. We're talking about, you know, people and the rhetoric in Lithuania, for example, is that politicians are saying that if they would come legally, if they would fly to Vilnius, then we can accept them as asylum seekers. But right now they are coming, like flying to Minsk, and coming through the border illegally by breaking our laws and stuff like that. So one thing is that we shouldn't forget, or we always need to remember, that access to legal pathways, even to get visas from third world countries, like for example, we have people coming in from Ivory Coast, where in Africa we know that Lithuania has maybe 2 consulate offices, which is in South Africa and in Egypt, and one of them in Nigeria. So and Africa is a huge continent with 55 countries, and traveling maybe even coming to Europe sometimes and coming to Lithuania is more easy than going to other African nations in order to have access to the consulate offices. So I think that's something which the European Commission and European countries need to remember. And also we have to remember that people who are coming to Lithuania actually, or to Europe actually, are those who can afford to come. So it's not only people who are, you know, like who are facing violation of their rights in their country of origin, but they should have money in order to come here, or people with high skill, like who are high skilled and high earning in their country of origin. So it's bigger, wider than what we are thinking about. And if just to portray the numbers of displaced people and number of refugees in the world, so we have 850 million people displaced, and Europe is residing about, I don't know, 3 to 5% of that. So we have to remember that, like, you know, 97% of the displaced people and forced migrants actually are not in the European territory. And highly skilled migrants being closed in, detention center when they can be hired and produce and right away, like they could serve the market. We're still keeping them as, criminals, and we are saying that we cannot keep them because we don't have money. Actually, when the market globally today, we have lack of labor force, right? And Europe is not an exception. And coming back to the question which rises right now, the civil society and the challenges civil society is facing, is that I think the biggest, it's like whenever you have issues like this, it is comfortable for politicians just to use it as an issue for the next election, and that's not a secret. Migrants have been used historically used as a political case, and today they are being used by populist group or by new parties which are coming up to be used as a tool and as a reason. So what civil society is facing is that civil society usually knows the human rights and the other convention their country is bound by, and therefore they are raising the question that isn't this a violation? And that way politicians are of course using them to make them as enemy of the state. Yeah, you guys are supporting foreigners, and you are not, you're not standing for your country, for your sovereignty, and that way it is kind of creating a friction, which is, it's good for clickbaits. The media writes about it, and that's it. The society is hooked on that. So that's why people, like me, who went through that and who can be vocal and who have access to, and the media and the society should speak up. You cannot be just quiet and close your eyes and say nothing. You have to come up and say, hey, look here. Those people are smuggled into the country. They are lied to, and it will not stop. Migration is something, a force which was happening for the history, as long as the history of human beings. I'm always saying that I'm from a country where human beings were found. So it's like, why are you in Europe? Yeah, I came to search for my brothers and sisters who left the continent millions years ago. So we have to remember the history. We've been always migrating. And today we have animals migrating. It's our nature. It's just that controlled legal migration gives safety for the host country and for the people who are also migrating to other countries. It's just that when we are talking about legal pathways, we have to make sure that there are places and points and posts where they could apply for asylum. If we are saying people who are being returned, go away, and we're telling them to go to the Minsk, embassy to apply for asylum, I don't think that is fair or true or ethical, or I don't know. So
even legal. So thank you so much, Eskender, for giving also this global perspective that is often so much lost, and this idea that everyone is coming into the EU while the numbers are showing it's actually not the case at all, and that maybe we are having a bit of a lot of imagination on what's happening with this migration in the EU. And now I see Christian Momers has been patiently raising the hand to answer, I guess, also about this idea of human rights defenders. And also I would add some questions, and afterwards I will introduce Katarzyna into the discussion, because she has just joined us now, I guess, coming from another meeting. So EU is acting under assumption that human rights defenders often act outside the EU in countries like Belarus or Russia. However, how about situation within the EU? We don't have such term today to speak about defenders, how Council of Europe is dealing with that. And there is another question from Anina Varho that I just wanted to join in together. To you, while Belarus is not a member of European Convention on Human Rights, she says it's also convention on ICCPR and International Covenant of Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, and Convention against Torture. Could, in your opinion, there be argument made that Belarus's violations on Article 26, Pacta sunt servanda, Vienna Conventions, and a kind of acting in good faith under all those international covenants, and whether this would give us any kind of possibility to resolve this human rights situation in Belarus. So so human rights on the EU and in Belarus, and especially the role of defenders.
Thank you. I will try and stay in my lane again and talk about the Council of Europe area and not so much about EU policy. But I did want to pick up on this point of civil society, because I think it's very important, not just in the specific context of Poland and Lithuania and Latvia, but what we are seeing is that the proliferation of pushbacks and other violations at borders in Europe is going hand in hand with often a crackdown on human rights defenders, on civil society, who are working with migration. And I think what is very noticeable as well, that this also includes countries that have traditionally had a very good and supportive relationship with civil society more generally. But now that civil society is working on a inconvenient topic like migration, we've seen a very big shift in attitude and how they are being treated. So this is obviously very worrying, as we see that in many cases we have civil society providing essential humanitarian assistance, sometimes where states have retreated and where NGOs or others, individuals jump in to fill that gap, to provide legal assistance to make sure that people can access their rights, but also, and I think this explains to some extent the combination of the increase of pushbacks and crackdown on civil society, they are eyes on the ground. So a lot of the reports that come up about pushbacks come from civil society, and by the way, from journalists, which is another issue and where we see some of the same mechanisms in place. And like I said, this happens across the Council of Europe area, and the Commissioner has tried to raise this in several situations, and specifically also to push member states to move towards constructive cooperation. When dealing with human rights defenders, our member states have committed to providing them with an enabling environment. And, you know, at a minimum, that would mean providing them with access to the places where they need to work, not criminalizing them, but also protecting them from retaliation, for example, by members of the public, because we also see this happening. So I just wanted to mention that as a kind of slightly broader perspective on the role of civil society in Europe when it comes to issues of asylum and migration. Very briefly on the question of Belarus's obligations, I think the short answer would be yes, obviously Belarus has obligations and needs to meet them. And I don't think there's anyone who's spoken today who doesn't recognize that this needs to be the case. How we get there with Belarus is, of course, another very difficult question. But clearly, Belarus also needs to be held accountable for what it is doing. I'm sure many of the members in the audience have seen yesterday the intervention by 3 UN special representatives, where they call not just on Poland, but on Belarus to take action and actually to cooperate to resolve this situation. I think from the perspective of the Council of Europe, where in the end our job is to be a watchdog and to promote compliance with our member states, you know, both is true. We want Belarus to implement its obligations under international law, but the fact that Belarus might not be doing it cannot mean that we don't keep applying our standards to the Council of Europe member states who are dealing with this situation. And that might come across as very unfair to those countries and very unsatisfactory, but the system of human rights protection cannot work if we can cherry pick in which situations rights are protected and when not. So, I mean, this is probably just stating the obvious, but I think it's important also because the discussion now about hybrid attacks by Belarus, as legitimate as it is, also threatens to overshadow the human rights aspects of the situation. And I think we need to make sure that we keep inserting that perspective into the conversation wherever we can, also because the situation is so extremely politicized. So there is a need to be quite vocal and to be quite active on raising this issue. So I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but I will leave it here.
Thank you, Christian, for this very insightful elaboration. And now with this, I would move to Katarzyna Wenzel. She's also Frontex Fundamental Rights Officer. So maybe also just before we move to you, I would add one more question or rather like statement that about the situation. So on Latvia, we have also colleagues from Latvia. So here, Baiba Kristina is asking or basically saying that in Latvia, where the situation is similar as in Lithuania, Poland, there have been proposals also to amend the asylum law, and in order to state that those asylum cases where the status of refugee, no subsidiary protection has been granted, and if asylum seeker has entered country in an irregular way, criminal proceedings should start regarding illegal border crossing, and these would be almost like automatically initiated against them after asylum case is over. So there was a request to comment on that, and I think the same ideas or at least contemplations about such law in Lithuania. So Katarzyna, like Frontex is in a way tasked to oversee what is the fundamental rights situation in all, I guess, 3 countries, or where do you have presence? How do you do that, and how do you ensure that, and how, whether and how we heard the questions about civil society or applicants themselves can bring the cases or complaints to you. What are the procedures, if you could enlighten us?
Sure, thank you very much. Can you hear me? I have some technical issues joining the meeting. Thank you very much for this kind invitation, and my apologies for not being able to be with you the first part of the meeting. Yes, my name is Katarzyna Wenzel. I work in the Fundamental Rights Office of Frontex since June as in a capacity of the Senior Fundamental Rights Monitor, but I've been with the office already for 3 years. I have legal background, and in my past also experience I've been with the in the national context, but also with this civil society for several years, working with refugees and migrants in Poland, but also abroad with OSCE mission. So maybe I will tell you a few words about the monitors for those of you who have not been familiar with Frontex activities or developments. And actually, I feel this is a bit a historical moment because with the most recent regulation of the Frontex, one of the biggest, actually the biggest EU agency right now, there have been important expansion and strengthening of the mandate of the Fundamental Rights Office, who is an independent body within EU agency. We have the independent role, same for the staff as for the Fundamental Rights Officer. And it means also our, let's say, the status, a bit different status within the agency. We have also, we need to have access to all areas where Frontex is operating. And for those of you who are not familiar with Frontex operations, please keep in mind that Frontex is supporting the member states or the third countries in some countries where the operations are also taking place. So this is not a separate institution or operational activities at the border, but supporting the countries which request Frontex to support due to some migratory challenges at the certain borders. And answering to your question, yes, Frontex is now operational in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, apart from also other countries in West and in South. We are also, as monitors, able to go and to monitor the situation on the ground, which we have already been doing for Lithuania. I was myself in August with the monitoring mission with other colleagues, looking into the situation and trying to also see if these activities are compliant with fundamental rights, because this is our main mandate and role. And of course, it is often difficult to distinguish or differentiate with, is it Frontex operation or is it the national operation, because everything is actually very much interrelated and is happening also in the same border area. So of course, we are looking into national procedures, into national practices as well. For Poland is a bit more, I would say, tricky, as Frontex has limited presence at the Polish border, meaning limited to border crossing points, which also limits our capacities in terms of monitoring, because we could only be at the border crossing points, but not but not at the green border where most of the allegations of human rights, fundamental rights violations are reported. Coming back to Lithuania, I could share you some of our observations and findings from these first missions. Actually, I'm also preparing for the next week. We'll also go to Lithuania again, and also planning to also visit Latvia, of course, as this is also one of the countries that are also facing now challenges. In Lithuania, we were able to talk to various stakeholders, including civil societies. We met also with Red Cross. We met with ombudsperson and also other actors on the ground. In addition to national authorities, local at the central level, and of course Frontex staff who is present there, meaning the border guards who are patrolling the area, who are supporting together with Lithuanian officers performing these patrols or collecting certain information. So we were given access to actually nearly all activities except for patrolling, which is more problematic, and also for security reasons. We are also in negotiations to also allow us to be also present and observe, not only interact with the border guards, which is of course very limited way to receive information, and maybe also one remark that this is still under process, meaning the first fundamental rights monitors have been recruited in July this year, and there is a group of 20 monitors who have been undergoing trainings the past couple of months, and we are now becoming, let's say, operational and also designing methodology and the modalities of our work. So this is also something to keep in mind, that this is the first missions, first tries to see what works, what doesn't work, and also to get also familiar with the situation, with activities, to better understand, and to also make the national authorities aware of our presence and of our role, because this was also not that evident. So on our observation based on these first missions in Lithuania, yes, we were told, actually the national authorities are very open about the practices, and we were told about we were of course aware before going there about the legislative changes which allowed migrants to be redirected to the border, and it was also confirmed. And we, although the Frontex officers are not directly involved with the so-called redirection of people, however, there is this high risk, and this is very probable that these practices are taking place. And on positive note,
sorry, Katarzyna, could you conclude? We just need to finish discussion, and I see the questions for personnel still.
Okay, so maybe two mechanisms I will maybe also mention here, because quite important on complaints, because this is also what you were asking. If a person is believing or thinking that his or her rights have been violated, there is a possibility to submit a complaint. And this is also something that we always raise and try with our officers on the ground to make them aware that they need to, one second, I will just connect, that they need to inform about this mechanism, because this is an obligation. There is also a special template, leaflet, so all materials in several languages available for the people to be able to submit such a complaint. And also another mechanism which is also important in this context, serious incident reporting. This is like internal mechanism on obligation to report on any situation which one or another officer thinks that it might be fundamental rights related. And actually in Lithuania we have received quite a number, to my knowledge now, I think at least 14 serious incidents reports indicating exactly these practices of collective expulsions, which is I think the most problematic. Of course, it is very closely related with lack of effective access. So we were looking into this to the asylum procedure. but also these temporary accommodations on the frontier sites that we were also visiting and talking to people who were accommodated there. Which de facto constitute the detention, yes, because people are staying there for several weeks or months without information on the procedure, without access to information, legal assistance, etc. And
okay.
Also,
Katarzyna,
yes.
we need to move further, but thank you so much. So if you can post maybe how civil society, or I don't know, those who are observing various violations, how they contact your agency. Then let's move to Tom Snells before we come back to Tineke Strik and Sergio Carrera to conclude. And I guess we'll prolong a bit discussion. So those watching on our SEPS website can move to YouTube already channel to see a bit of continuation. So Tom Snells, there has been a lot of questions to you. One asking whether you kind of confirm that there are those illegal pushbacks taking place, and how you are going to uphold the fundamental rights and rights of asylum seekers in the EU, a bit more general. Then there was one more question asking about possibilities from MEP Tineke. I was asking about the possibilities of concrete initiative to ask other states voluntarily to invite people who are trapped at our border at Poland, he means, and to process their asylum application. So interestingly, Poland is calling for voluntary, it seems, relocation or mechanism in this case, or at least some people. Yeah, there was question about any responses, question from Selena from DRC. And if there are any infringement proceedings started, or if Commission is contemplating about those proceedings. Then Alexeis Dimitros is also asking about compliance with the EU law and compliance with the other rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. So a lot of legal questions for you, Tom Snells, and little time, but we hope you can manage.
Thank you, Lina. I tried to reply to all of the questions, in writing in the Q&A box. I hope they popped up. So I mean, indeed, there are a lot of legal questions. But over and above the legal questions, I think there's also a political dimension, because you can have a really robust legal framework in place if there is no political will to apply it, or if it's applied in a very restrictive manner, then we don't make much progress. So I think there's one point that I would just like to pick up what I heard, and I fully subscribe to what Christian said from Strasbourg, from the Council of Europe, on NGOs and on civil society and fundamental rights defenders. I think one issue that I see, and we are try to be extremely careful on this, is the language that we use in relation to migration and asylum. And we don't want to talk about illegal migration or illegal migrants or illegal people, because then you put people outside the rule of law. And that is not acceptable. And that is what we see in certain member states, where NGOs or people that are trying to help people in need, are being prosecuted even because they are hosting an illegal person. I mean, that is just not possible, I think. I mean, that goes over and above the legal framework that I have, because it's true that on the one side, helping people to cross the border illegally is a crime, but helping people in need is an obligation, an overriding obligation. So I would really, launch a call to really be very careful about the language that we use in this area. And from our side, you will not see references to illegal migration or illegal migrants or illegals or illegal people, because you get into a situation where they are denied help, or people that help them are being prosecuted, I think, and that is a big problem. And you will see that we address this in some member states in our rule of law reports, and also in the footnotes to that. And I think we will do a next iteration this year, also issue recommendations. And for us, this is really an important part of the legal political dimension. And I think for the rest, all the other questions, I think, yeah, some of it are indeed very technical, but are legal, but I try to reply to them, but happy to come back to that. So.
There was one more about to whom belongs this territory border zone between, let's say, Poland and Lithuania and Belarus. It seems to be like no man's land at the moment, or at least some authorities pretend to be it. So Tom Snells, if Commission has a clear answer on this?
Well, here I would again agree with Tineke Strik. I mean, there's no such thing as a no man's land. I mean, there's a border. There are two sides to a border. I mean, you know, in airports or in you know, in certain circumstances, we can use a fiction, you know, and in terms of, you know, people are entering their, I mean, they're either their claims or being processed or passports being checked or whatever it is. But there's no such thing as a no man's land where no rule applies. That is my answer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this very important remark on the narrative, and that no person is illegal, and that migrants, first of all, are persons, and administrative status remain the secondary question. However, we see very powerful narratives shaping in Lithuania, Poland, and we heard from colleagues in the comment in Latvia as well. So with this, I would move to conclusions and give over the virtual microphone to Tineke Strik to just resume her observations and what EU should do if we got any clarity what's happening and what EU should do.
Yes, I think this panel showed that there is an urgent need to do something, and actually we all agree that although we can accuse Lukashenko of this situation, I mean, this is the cause, but we are in this situation, and we should not let migrants, refugees be the victim of that. And this is what is at the moment happening. And also, as Kadar was also mentioned in the beginning, that it seems that migrants are also now being used as a deterrence for other migrants to come. And I think this is absolutely unacceptable. And I think every one of us agreed with that. But then how to get out of this situation? I think, although we should indeed support the member states who are at the border with Belarus with a lot of assistance, also in processing asylum seekers, in offering relocation, in helping guarding the borders, but also be very clear and critical as to that they have to obey the EU and Council of Europe international obligations. Otherwise, I mean, otherwise we can do away with the EU and our values. And I think that message should be much stronger. And we should also look at ways to enforce compliance. And of course, this also goes with other areas at the borders where pushbacks are taking place. We talked a lot about the role of civil society and that they're really under threat. And I think also there we should really look at more ways to protect them better so that they can be the ears and eyes and also the support for asylum seekers and raise issues at stake. Maybe it's good to mention, besides the rule of law, the annual report of the Commission, that the European Parliament is now also drafting a statute for European cross-border associations and non-profit organizations. Of course, we already have the Council of Europe instruments, which was Christian referring to, but I think it's good that there is some awareness in the EU itself also. And also we have to look at legislation like the Facilitation Directive, which still gives the option for member states to criminalize helping with irregular entrance, even if it's just for humanitarian reasons. But I would like to say something about indeed this enforcement. And in that sense, the Commission plays a key role because this is the guardian of the treaties. There is, despite the oppression of NGOs and journalists, a lot of evidence, a lot of information on the table. We have very consistent reports on allegations from authoritative actors, from very good journalists. So the thing is, should we really limit ourselves with saying we should have more monitoring or more transparency, or should we already act on what we know now? I think, of course, this is a rhetoric question. We should do more, and we can do more already. We talked about the new legislation in Poland, Latvia, Lithuania. I think the Commission should immediately have a thorough analysis of this legislation to see if it is in line with EU law, and if not, undertake action. And then we have the situation that the national law may be correct, but the practices are not. And there, the Commission tends to say we're not an investigative body, but I think that the European Court of Human Rights gives the right example. At the moment, you have an overwhelming amount of consistent, authoritative reports giving the same message and coming up with similar evidence. And on the other hand, the government is only denying without any substantiation, without any investigation. I think then the Commission could and should also act and say, look, this is convincing enough. If you don't have anything else to challenge, then we assume that those violations take place. And that could be a start of infringement procedures or whatever. And furthermore, I think we have a lot of financial instruments. We are funding a lot of the migration and border management that should be made more strict, conditional upon human rights compliance. So I think there's more to be done now, of course, for the Commission, but also for the European Parliament and the member states to protect those who are working with migrants and refugees, and of course to protect migrants and refugees, that they are not subjected to this horrible game, so to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tineke Strik. And actually, in light of ASILE Horizon 2020 project that we are following, this is also the question, what kind of example EU is setting for the rest of the globe, actually, by doing or allowing to do this kind of things, or the derogations from internationally agreed norms. So with this, I'm giving the floor to Sergio Carrere to conclude and to thank to our participants.
Thank you, Lina, and thank you to all the speakers and the participants for your excellent inputs and participation. And I've learned a very big deal in relation to what is happening in these countries, and it's become very clear when it comes to upholding existing reception conditions and access to asylum at the borders, in border regions, how important it is to uphold existing EU standards and enforce them. Because in terms of numbers, both Polish, Lithuanian and Latvian authorities should be perfectly capable of dealing with this number of applicants in light of existing EU asylum legislation. So there is a question of political unwillingness to a certain extent to deliver this, but also a question of capacity. So there the EU indeed should invest very clearly on upholding and really fostering quality asylum systems and migration systems. But also in the sense of following up. So we've learned a number of judgments have been issued by the Strasbourg court and by the Luxembourg courts, and more could be done to really fully implement those judgments. And here the role of civil society, but journalists, agencies and new institutions could be central as well to make sure that these judgments are indeed finding their way in practice. And Christian mentioned a clear obligation from a Strasbourg jurisprudence for member states to ensure genuine and effective policies for people to apply for asylum and for legal entry. And if anything we've learned is that this is clearly not the case by choice. By political choice, this is not the case. And also when it comes to the European Union, there is a right to seek asylum. There is a fundamental right to seek asylum. And this is not just about border crossing points. This is also in the scope of border surveillance. Wherever that surveillance happens, law enforcement officials in Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia are responsible absolutely should be responsible and potentially liable for not upholding their constitutional and EU and Council of Europe obligations. This is not a question of balancing. As Tom said, you know, in the sense that Tom said that it is not an either or. It should be and in the sense that these are absolute rights. We are talking about absolute rights where no derogation is acceptable. Not even in times of emergency, of declared emergencies and crises. You know, there are very clear legal commitments that are non-negotiable. And I've learned from the different interventions how important it is for the EU, and in this case also for the European Commission, to clearly speak about these elements. Now, the EU Pact has been mentioned, and to my understanding, the reference of the EU Pact to crisis and force majeure also runs the risk of sending a message to some EU governments that they can actually do this, that they can derogate the rule of law legitimately when there should not be. Also, Tom mentioned this should not be the case. You know, putting actions outside the rule of law and derogating basic remedies, effective remedies, and allowing for collective expulsions. And here the EU, also last point, you know, is contributing to professionalization. Professionalization in the field of asylum, in the field of border management, and more could be done in this regard, in the sense of we are talking about monitoring, and we've learned about Frontex current model of monitoring, but let's be frank, I mean, that model is not independent. I mean, it still relies on Frontex director. And the question of having these eyes on the ground, you know, gathering ways in which and allowing the work of civil society actors, NGOs, volunteers, human rights bodies in really effectively monitoring what is happening is crucial. So for the EU to set up a border monitor that is independent from Frontex, and for the EU also to freeze support in member states that are openly violating fundamental rights and EU law standards, to really freeze support because it comes at the expense of the legitimation of the EU itself. Supporting member states that are choosing not to respect EU values. This runs contrary to the very essence and spirit of the treaties. But I will leave it there. We will continue this conversation in the ASILE project, and it's been a fascinating debate. And I would like to thank, of course, Lina Boselute for chairing the conversation. And again, to everybody, my colleagues at CEPS, Miriam Mir and Jean-Luc, and of course, the Office of Tineke Strik and Ruben for your cooperation. It's always a pleasure to join forces, and thank you for your involvement also in our project. So big thanks to everybody.
And of course to all our dear speakers, and we see Eskadar is even a global mover on the move at the moment. So we hope to
yes,
hear
I was
from you
that.
soon. To hear from you soon and to keep in touch. And thank you so much for your insights. And let's follow up this conversation with the concrete actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.